He was the king of the city, and she was his truant, beautiful wife. At the biggest charity gala of the year, in front of everyone who mattered, Marcus Vance didn't just break her heart, he shattered her life. He called her dead weight, publicly replacing her with a younger, more suitable woman. He had security escort her out, penniless and humiliated. But Marcus made one fatal mistake. He thought he was evicting a stray. He never realized he had just declared war on a dynasty. He turned pull only when her family, the real power, arrived unannounced. The penthouse on Park Avenue was less a home and more a museum of Marcus Vance's success. It was all glass, brushed steel, and cold white marble cantilevered 70 floors above New York City. And like any prized exhibit, Elara Vance was kept in perfect, silent condition. Elara was his masterpiece, or so he often told his friends. He'd discovered her, he'd say, working as a simple art gallery assistant in Soho. He'd plucked her from obscurity, polished her, and given her his name. In return, she was expected to be beautiful, silent, and grateful. This evening was the dress rehearsal for the main event, the annual Vance Foundation Gala. It was Marcus's self-coronation, a night where the city's elite would gather to write 7-figure checks and kiss the ring of its newest corporate king. The blue Elara, not the green, Marcus said, not looking up from his phone. He was already in his custom Tom Ford tuxedo. Elara stood in the enormous walk-in closet, the emerald green silk dress pooled at her feet. I thought the green brought out, it makes you look sallow. The blue, the one I chose. His thumb swiped dismissively. And the Lockwood diamonds, not your grandmother's pearls. They look quaint. Quaint. The pearls were the only thing she had left of her mother's mother. A woman who had run a European shipping empire with more steel in her velvet glove than Marcus possessed in his entire body. But Marcus didn't know that. He thought Elara Hayes, the name she'd been using when they met, was just some girl from a decent but unremarkable family in New England. She had never corrected him. She had wanted to be loved for herself, not for her name, her real name. The name she had run away from 8 years ago, desperate for a normal life, was Devereaux. Of course, Marcus, she murmured, her voice the practiced soft tone he preferred. She slipped on the sapphire blue gown. It was exquisite, but it felt like a uniform. Downstairs, the pre-gala fundraiser was already underway. Marcus, CEO of Vance Industries, a rapidly expanding but deeply over-leveraged real estate firm, was holding court. He loved the sound of his own voice, especially when it was echoed by fawning investors and nervous politicians. Elara drifted through the crowd, a perfect smiling ghost. She passed Senator Keating, who gave her a polite empty nod, and a few wives of board members who offered air kisses that smelled of Chanel No. 5 and rivalry. Then she saw her, Chloe Sterling. Chloe was the Vance Foundation's new Director of Strategic Partnerships. She was barely 26, with a law degree from Yale and a predatory ambition that Elara recognized instantly. She was also, Elara knew, with a cold, sinking certainty, sleeping with her husband. She'd seen the late-night strategy texts, the lingering touches in the hallway, the way Marcus looked at her, not like an exhibit, but like a new acquisition he couldn't wait to unwrap. Chloe was in a blood-red dress, her hand on Marcus's arm, laughing a little too loudly. Marcus caught Elara's eye from across the room. There was no apology in his gaze, no shame. There was only impatience. "Elara, darling," he boomed, gesturing her over. The room quieted. Chloe was just telling me about the new projections for the children's wing. Brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. Chloe smiled, a flash of perfect white teeth. Oh, Elara, you look lovely. Blue is so obedient on you. Marcus, we really must finalize the seating charts for tomorrow. She'd used Elara's presence not to retreat, but to stake her claim. She was already the acting hostess. Elara felt the familiar chill. She had spent 5 years being the perfect, unassuming wife, hiding her intellect, her background, and her strength, all in the name of a love she'd thought was real. She had sacrificed her dynasty for this man. And as she stood there, watching him look at Chloe Sterling, she realized her sacrifice hadn't just been in vain. It had been a joke. "If you'll excuse me," Elara said, her voice a whisper. "I need to check on the catering for tomorrow." Marcus waved her away, already turning back to Chloe. Yes, you handle that." Elara walked away. Her back straight, her hands clenched so tightly her nails dug into her palms. She didn't go to the kitchen. She went to her small hidden art studio at the back of the penthouse, the one room Marcus found cluttered and never entered. She closed the door, leaned against it, and let out a breath she felt she'd been holding for 5 years. On her easel was a half-finished painting, a chaotic, brilliant storm of dark blues and violent slashes of white. It was the only place she was allowed to be herself. She looked at the phone on her desk. One number was programmed into it, a number she had sworn never to call. Matriarch. Her finger hovered over the contact. Not yet. Not until the humiliation was complete. And she had a terrible, sickening feeling that tomorrow, at the gala, Marcus was planning to give her exactly that. The grand ballroom of the Pierre Hotel was a sea of glittering diamonds and desperate ambition. This was the night, the 10th annual Vance Foundation Gala. Marcus had spent a rumored $3 million on the event, transforming the space into a modern Versailles, complete with ice sculptures and flowing champagne fountains. Elara stood by his side at the entrance, her smile as practiced and brittle as the spun sugar on the croquembouche. She wore the blue dress. She wore the Lockwood diamonds. She was the perfect, silent accessory. "Marcus, wonderful!" a donor bellowed, slapping Marcus on the back. "Senator, so glad you could make it. Marcus, you've outdone yourself. Only the best you know that." Marcus was electric feeding on the adoration. He barely looked at Elara, except to occasionally grip her arm in a gesture that looked like affection to the cameras, but felt like a warning to her. Chloe Sterling was already inside, working the room like a seasoned politician. She had saved a seat for herself at the head table right next to Marcus. Elara's seat, she noted with a cold prickle, was on the other side next to a doddering half-deaf board member. The hierarchy was clear. The transition was already in progress. "Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. The presentation is about to begin." The lights dimmed. A slickly produced video played showing Marcus Vance cutting ribbons, shaking hands and staring thoughtfully at blueprints. It painted him as a visionary, a philanthropist, a man single-handedly rebuilding the city. Elara watched, her stomach twisting. The man on the screen was a stranger. The man she'd married, or thought she'd married, was a quiet, driven man who'd told her he hated the stuffy world of his parents. It had all been a lie. He hadn't hated it. He'd just been on the outside, desperate to get in. And she, Elara Devereaux, had been his key. Except he'd never even known which lock she opened. The video ended. The spotlight hit the podium. Marcus strode onto the stage to thunderous applause. "Thank you, thank you." He beamed, holding his hands up. "Friends, colleagues, family." He began with the usual platitudes. thanking the donors, praising the board, outlining the foundation's bold new vision. Elara let the words wash over her. She was tracing the patterns on the tablecloth, planning her escape. A small apartment, a quiet job, a life where she could finally paint. She would have to call her family. The thought was humiliating, but not as humiliating as this. Then his tone shifted. "But change," Marcus said, his voice dropping, "is not always easy. To build something new, you must first have the courage to tear down what is old." The room grew quiet. This wasn't in the prepared remarks she'd seen. For Vance Industries to reach the next level, for me to reach my full potential, I have to be willing to make hard cuts, to shed dead weight. A few people shifted uncomfortably. This was unusually aggressive even for Marcus. Elara's blood ran cold. She looked up. The spotlight was still on him, but his eyes, two dark pits of ambition, were locked directly on her. "My marriage, my partnership with Elara, has been a comfort." He used the past tense. The air left her lungs. But comfort is the enemy of greatness. There were gasps. Senator Keating, sitting nearby, looked frozen, a forkful of lobster thermidor halfway to his mouth. "Elara has been a wonderful part of my journey." Marcus continued, his voice dripping with false sincerity. "But her journey ends here. We have amicably decided to separate." This was the first Elara was hearing of it. Amicably. "And in her place," Marcus said, a triumphant smile spreading across his face, "I am thrilled to announce a new partner, someone who shares my vision, my drive, and my passion for the future." He gestured to the side of the stage. "Please welcome the new Senior Vice President of Vance Industries and the new chairwoman of this foundation, Ms. Chloe Sterling." Chloe glided onto the stage, bathed in a second spotlight, her red dress clinging to her like a second skin. She took Marcus's hand. He kissed her, not a peck on the cheek, but a full, passionate kiss right there on stage in front of 500 of the most powerful people in New York. The camera flashes were blinding. It was an execution. Elara sat paralyzed, the blood roaring in her ears. She was vaguely aware of a man in a black suit, one of Marcus's private security, approaching her table. "Ma'am," he murmured, his voice gentle but firm. "Mr. Vance has arranged a car." He wasn't asking. He was telling. "But my things," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Your belongings will be forwarded to an address of your choosing." The security guard said, his eyes empty. He was reading a script. She stood up. The room was spinning. Every eye was on her. Some held pity. Most held a cruel reptilian curiosity. They were witnessing a social death, and they would dine out on it for weeks. As the guard's hand touched her elbow, steering her towards the exit, Marcus's voice boomed over the microphone one last time. "And now, a new beginning, to the future." The applause was deafening. The heavy ballroom doors swung shut behind her, cutting off the sound. She was in the silent, carpeted hallway, alone. The guard had already melted away. She walked one foot in front of the other through the opulent lobby. The doorman who had greeted her with a fawning Mrs. Vance just 2 hours earlier now looked straight through her. She stepped out into the cold November air. The car Marcus had arranged was a standard black Lincoln town car, not her usual Bentley driver. It was a final petty twist of the knife. As she slid into the back seat, her phone buzzed. A text from Marcus. "Penthouse locks have been changed. My lawyer, Mr. Adler, will contact you tomorrow with the divorce settlement. It is non-negotiable. Be smart, Elara. Don't make this messy." A second buzz. her credit card, an alert from her bank. Account frozen by primary holder. He hadn't just divorced her. He hadn't just humiliated her. He had erased her. He had left her on the street, penniless, with nothing but a $20,000 dress and a pair of borrowed diamonds. She took a deep, shuddering breath. The tears didn't come. What came instead was a coldness she hadn't felt in years, a familiar, ancestral cold. She looked at her own phone, the one he didn't pay for, the one she'd kept hidden. She opened her contacts and pressed the one named Matriarch. It rang once. "It's done," a crisp, ageless voice said. "No hello." Elara's voice was hoarse. "Grandmother, it's Elara." There was a silence on the line, a vast, snowy silence that stretched from New York to the family chateau in Geneva. "He did it," Elara whispered, the first tear finally tracking a path through her perfect makeup. "He did it all." Another pause. Then the voice of Genevieve Devereaux, the iron-willed head of the Devereaux global empire, spoke 3 words. "Give me the name." "Marcus Vance," Elara said. "Vance Industries." "I see. And the other one?" "Chloe Sterling. Her father is, I think, in logistics." "He is," Genevieve said. "And his largest contract is with our shipping division in Rotterdam." "Was." Elara closed her eyes. The machine was already turning. "Stay where you are, Elara," the matriarch commanded. "A car is coming for you, not a Lincoln. You are a Devereaux. You will not be seen in a Lincoln." The line clicked dead. Elara looked out the window. The town car was pulling up to a mid-level hotel, Marcus's final insult, a prepaid room. She told the driver to stop. She got out. She would not go in. She stood on the corner of 59th and 5th, a statue of sapphire blue. She was no longer Mrs. Vance. Within 5 minutes, a black, gleaming Rolls-Royce Phantom, the kind with diplomatic plates, purred to a stop in front of her. A driver in a full Devereaux grey livery stepped out and opened the door. "Ms. Elara," he said, as if he'd just dropped her off 5 minutes ago. "The matriarch is en route." As Elara slid into the plush, buttery leather interior, she knew. Marcus hadn't just shed dead weight. He had just torpedoed his entire fragile world. And he had no idea the iceberg was now heading straight for him. The Devereaux safe house wasn't a house. It was the entire 50th floor presidential suite of the St. Regis, permanently retained under a corporate name for family use. It was quiet, opulent, and most importantly, secure. Elara spent the first 24 hours in a fog. The Devereaux team, a silent, efficient group of professionals who had materialized at the hotel, had handled everything. A woman named Sophia, who was part assistant, part security, had produced a wardrobe of perfectly tailored clothes in Elara's exact size. A lawyer, not a family one, but a specialist, had appeared, taken her statement, and vanished. Elara's prized Lockwood diamonds had been removed, catalogued, and sent to a vault to be returned to Marcus in the most insulting way possible via a bonded messenger with a receipt. She sat on a silk chaise lounge overlooking Central Park, a cup of tea she didn't remember asking for in her hand. The shock was wearing off, replaced by a deep, vibrating hum of shame and a darker, colder anger. She had been so stupid. She had fallen for the oldest trick, a charming pull and a promise of normalcy. She who had been trained since birth to spot a grifter, a social climber, a liar. She had seen all those traits in Marcus, and had, in her romantic delusion, mistaken them for ambition. Her phone, the Vance phone, was a smouldering ruin. The media was having a field day. Vance's new vision, CEO dumps wife for VP at annual gala. From +1 to -1. The socialites' stunning fall. Marcus Vance and Chloe Sterling, the new power couple. The gossip columns were brutal. They painted her as a clueless, boring last-season wife who hadn't been able to keep up with her dynamic husband. Page 6 ran a particularly cruel piece, quoting an insider, clearly Chloe, who said Ilara's only hobby was finger painting. Meanwhile, Marcus and Chloe were embarking on a victory tour. They were photographed having a celebratory breakfast at Balthazar Chloe's hand, flashing a massive canary yellow diamond, a ring that must have been purchased weeks, if not months ago. Marcus had given an interview to the Wall Street Journal set up for the morning after the gala. Vance Industries is pivoting. He'd said, his picture plastered on the front page, oozing confidence. We are leaner, more aggressive. We've cut all sentimental ties. Our new flagship project, the Hudson Elysium Tower, is fully funded. We are unstoppable. Ilara let the newspaper fall to the floor. Fully funded, she whispered. She knew for a fact the Elysium Tower was a house of cards. Marcus had leveraged everything, including the penthouse, to break ground. He was desperate for a final round of financing. The door to the suite opened. He's arrogant, and arrogance is expensive. Genevieve Devereaux stood in the doorway, not as a grandmother, but as a queen. She was 75, but looked 50. Her silver hair pulled into a severe, elegant chignon. She wore a Chanel suit the color of glacial ice. Behind her stood Ilara's two brothers, men who were as much a part of the family business as she was. Liam Devereaux, the elder. He was the enforcer, the CFO of Devereaux Holdings. He saw the world in numbers, and he had the face of a particularly unforgiving auditor. Julian Devereaux, the younger. He was the diplomat, the family's chief counsel and head of public relations. He was the charming one, the one who buried the bodies with a smile. Ilara, Genevieve said, walking over and kissing the air near her cheek. You look thin, and you've let your French get rusty. Grand-mère, Ilara said, standing. Sit, Genevieve commanded, taking the chair opposite her. Liam and Julian remained standing, flanking her, like two custom-suited watchtowers. I have read the news, Genevieve said, her lip curling in distaste as she gestured to the page 6 article. Finger painting. Disgraceful. I'm sorry, Ilara whispered. I brought shame. You did not. Liam interjected, his voice a low growl. You were betrayed. There is a difference. But Liam is correct, Julian added smoothly. The optics are unseemly. A Devereaux thrown out like common trash. It will not stand. Indeed, Genevieve said. Now, Ilara, tell us, what do you want? Ilara looked at her hands. I just want to disappear. I want to go to the farmhouse to paint. No, Genevieve said. It was final. That is what she wants. She motioned to the newspaper. The boring, clueless wife. You will not give them the satisfaction. You will not run. You ran once. Look where it got you. The words were sharp, but true. This is not a social slight, Ilara. This is a declaration of war. He didn't just humiliate you. He humiliated this family. He did it publicly, so we will respond publicly. He thinks he's a king. We will remind him what a dynasty looks like. Genevieve leaned forward. This man, Marcus Vance, he is leveraged to a private equity firm in Luxembourg for the Hudson Elysium project. Correct? Ilara nodded. LuxCap Partners. He was so proud of securing it. He said they were anonymous and stupid. Liam smiled a thin, cold expression. LuxCap Partners was acquired in a hostile takeover by Devereaux Holdings at 9:00 a.m. Central European Time this morning. The anonymous and stupid money he's building his dream on. It's ours. Elara's jaw dropped. But how? You left a paper trail, Julian said. In your finger-painting studio, you kept meticulous notes on his business, his passwords, his private servers. You were the perfect invisible wife. You were also the perfect spy. Elara hadn't even realized it. She just listened. She absorbed. And Ms. Chloe Sterling. Genevieve continued tapping a pristine white envelope on the table. Her father, Sterling Logistics. As I mentioned, their largest contract was with our Rotterdam port. That contract was terminated effective immediately for breach of ethical standards. Julian has also helpfully leaked to the press that Sterling Logistics is being investigated for customs fraud. They aren't, Liam noted. They are now, Julian corrected. Reputation is everything. So, Genevieve said, standing. This is the plan. Marcus Vance believes he is at his peak. He is celebrating his new life. We will let him. For 48 hours, he will be the king of New York. He is announcing his merger with Sino-Pacific Investments on Thursday. Correct. Elara nodded. It's the final piece of his Elysium funding. A press conference at his office. Excellent, Genevieve said. That is where we will cut the head off the snake. Elara, you will go to the salon. You will go shopping. You will be seen. But you will not be seen. You are preparing. Preparing for what? Elara asked, a new strength hardening her voice. For your reintroduction, Julian said, smiling. Elara Vance is dead. We are about to reintroduce the world to Elara Devereaux. For the next 48 hours, Marcus Vance lived in a golden-tinted bubble. His life was perfect. He woke up in his penthouse, the scent of Elara's dusty lavender, and old books finally replaced by Chloe's modern, sharp perfume. Chloe herself was a revelation. She woke up at 5 a.m., reviewed Chinese market reports before her first espresso, and matched his ambition step for step. She wasn't just a partner. She was a weapon. Did you see the journal? He said, throwing the paper onto the bed. Vance, the Maverick of Manhattan. They're finally getting it. Chloe looked up from her laptop, pouting her lips. I don't like Maverick. It sounds uncontrolled. I prefer visionary. But the picture is good. She walked over and straddled his lap. The press conference on Thursday is going to be massive. Once we announce the Sino-Pacific deal, we'll be untouchable. Marcus felt a surge of pure, unadulterated power. He had done it. He had achieved everything he'd ever wanted. He'd cut the one tie that was holding him back. Elara. He felt a brief mosquito-like sting of, not guilt, but annoyance. He'd received a curt email from a law firm he'd never heard of, Hadrian and Locke, confirming they represented Elara. They'd attached a copy of the prenuptial agreement he'd forced her to sign. It was ironclad. She got nothing. Her lawyer had only one request, that her art supplies be forwarded to a P.O. box. Marcus had laughed. Finger paintings. He'd told his assistant to handle it, which meant throw them in the building's incinerator. His lawyer, Mr. Adler, had called him. Marcus, just a flag, Adler had said, his voice tinny. This firm, Hadrian and Locke. They're not a divorce mill. They're significant. Their managing partner is on the Federal Reserve Board. So, Marcus had scoffed. She's probably got some bleeding heart pro bono case. She signed the papers Adler. It's done. As you say, Marcus. And the financials for the Sino-Pacific closing. Airtight, Marcus said. LuxCap wired the last tranche yesterday. The money is in escrow. The Hudson Elysium Tower is a go. His world was perfect. But there were small tremors. His assistant buzzed him. Mr. Vance. A slight issue. Sterling Logistics just declared force majeure. They're pulling their entire fleet. What? Marcus barked. They can't do that. They're Chloe's family. He'd stormed into Chloe's new cavernous office. What the hell is going on with your father? Chloe looked pale, her usual composure cracked. He said they're being investigated. Some ridiculous customs fraud charge. He said a contract was pulled, a big one. He's furious. He told me I should have stayed in my lane. Useless, Marcus muttered. Fine, we'll get another logistics company. Call O'Malley. O'Malley just terminated their contract with us, his assistant said over the intercom, her voice quavering. And so did Eastern Trucking and Global Link. What is this? Marcus roared. Is this a joke? They all cite financial risk reviews, the assistant whispered. A cold dread, the first he'd felt in days, began to creep up his spine. It doesn't matter, he said more to himself than to Chloe. It's all noise. The Sino-Pacific deal is all that matters. The money is in. The deal is closing. Thursday. Nothing can stop that. He was Marcus Vance. He was a maverick. He was a visionary. He was unstoppable. He spent the rest of the day in a flurry of angry calls, all of which went to voicemail. Suppliers he'd had lunch with last week were suddenly in a meeting. Bankers who had begged for his business were on vacation. It was a coincidence, a statistical blip. He went home craving the reassurance of his perfect penthouse. When he walked in, he found Chloe frantically packing a suitcase. What are you doing? He demanded. My father called, she said, her voice high and thin. The feds just raided his office. They're freezing our assets. His assets. He said this is a professional hit. He said, I'm radioactive. I have to go. Go where we have the press conference tomorrow. You don't get it, do you? She shrieked, her mask of sophistication shattering. This isn't about you. My family is being ruined. I thought you were a king, Marcus. But this is a war, and you're on the wrong side. What are you talking about? What war I won? Did you? She said, zipping the bag. This all started the day after that stupid gala. The day after you humiliated your little mouse of a wife. You poked something, Marcus. You poked something you shouldn't have. Get out, he hissed, his voice dropping. Gladly, she spat, grabbing her passport. And for the record, your Elysium Tower is a glass monstrosity, and I hate canary diamonds. She slammed the door. Marcus stood alone in the marble foyer, the silence of the penthouse deafening. The fear was no longer a creep. It was a flood. He ran to his office and pulled up the accounts for the LuxCap Partners financing. The money was still there in the escrow account safe. He breathed. It was fine. Chloe was a liability anyway. Her family was a mess. He was better off. He'd announce the deal tomorrow solo. He was a lone wolf, a visionary. He poured himself a 30-year-old Macallan. His hand shaking just slightly. It was all a coincidence. It had to be. Thursday, 11:00 a.m. The main conference hall at Vance Industries headquarters was packed. The Sino-Pacific deal was huge. It wasn't just a merger. It was a symbolic marriage of New York real estate and Asian capital. The Wall Street Journal, Bloomberg, the Financial Times, every major outlet was there. Marcus Vance stood backstage adjusting his power blue tie. He hadn't slept. The departure of Chloe, followed by a sleepless night of his suppliers' lines going dead, had left him rattled. But the adrenaline of the crowd, the flashing cameras, the knowledge that he was this close to pulling it off, steadied him. This was it. The moment he became a legend. "Ladies and gentlemen," his PR director announced from the podium, "the CEO of Vance Industries, Mr. Marcus Vance." Marcus strode onto the stage, forcing his most confident, shark-like smile. The applause was strong. "Thank you," he began, his voice booming. "Thank you for coming. What a day for New York. What a day for the future." He launched into his speech. He talked about vision. He talked about steel and glass and the skyline. He talked about the transformative partnership with Sino-Pacific. And now, at this very moment, he said, building to his crescendo, the $4 billion wire transfer that finalizes our joint venture is being released. The Hudson Elysium Tower is no longer a dream. It is a reality. He expected thunderous applause. Instead, there was a commotion at the back of the room. The heavy oak doors of the conference hall swung open. A few journalists turned, annoyed by the interruption. Then they fell silent. The silence spread like a virus. First, two very large, very well-dressed men, who looked like they could snap a person in half and then file a legal brief about it, entered and stood at ease, scanning the room. Then Julian Devereaux entered. He was smiling, radiating charm, and wearing a Savile Row suit that probably cost more than the podium Marcus was gripping. He was followed by Liam Devereaux, who was not smiling. Liam held a leather-bound portfolio, and he looked at the room at Marcus as if he were calculating its liquidation value. Then a hush fell as Genevieve Devereaux entered. She commanded the space not by speaking, but by breathing. The scent of her perfume, a rare custom blend Guerlain, preceded her. She stopped, surveyed the room, and her gaze, cold and assessing, settled on Marcus. Marcus had gone completely deathly still. His mind was racing. Devereaux. The Devereaux, the Swiss-French banking and logistics dynasty. The family that owned half of Europe and had been old money when the Rockefellers were still drilling. What were they doing here? He'd been trying to get a meeting with Devereaux Holdings for years. "Ms. Devereaux," Marcus stammered, his prepared speech forgotten. He fumbled off the stage, rushing toward her, his hand outstretched, his plastic smile snapping back into place. What an unexpected honor. I had no idea you were in New York. Had I known, I would have... Well, this is incredible." Genevieve looked at his outstretched hand as if it were a dead fish. She did not take it. "Mr. Vance," she said. Her voice was quiet, but it carried across the silent room like a shard of ice. "Please," he gushed. "My staff can find you a seat. We're just announcing it's a new era." "We are not here for a seat," Julian said, stepping forward smoothly. "We are here for a clarification." "A clarification," Marcus laughed nervously. "About what?" "The deal, it's all public." "No," Genevieve said. "Not about your deal, about a personal matter." The journalists were now out of their seats, cameras flashing recorders on. This was 1,000 times better than a boring merger. I don't understand," Marcus said. The dread was back thick and suffocating. "You see," Genevieve said, "this family takes its name very seriously, Mr. Vance, and you have, misused it." "Misused your name? I would never," he sputtered. "I have the utmost respect for—" "And yet," Genevieve continued, "you put a member of this family, the daughter of this house, you put her in a taxi, in the middle of the night, with her credit cards cancelled." The room inhaled as one. Marcus's brain short-circuited. "Daughter. Daughter. What daughter?" "You had her escorted from a public event, like a common criminal," Genevieve said, her voice rising almost imperceptibly, but to devastating effect. I don't know what you're talking about," Marcus stammered, his face losing all color. "Don't you—" And then Genevieve Devereux stepped to the side. She had been obscuring the doorway. Now she revealed the person standing just behind her. Elara. But this was not the Elara he knew. This was not the quiet, mousy woman in the ill-fitting quaint pearls. This was Elara Devereux. Her hair, once a simple brown, was now a rich dark auburn, styled in a cut so sharp it could draw blood. She wore a tailored suit of crimson red, a color of war that fit her like armor. Her grandmother's pearls were gone, replaced by a single massive Devereux family crest, a diamond and ruby lion. Her makeup was flawless. Her posture was steel. She looked at Marcus, not with pain or sadness or anger. She looked at him with pity. Marcus's blood turned to ice water. His smile froze, then collapsed. He turned a color of ash, a sickly pale green. He looked at the woman in red. He looked at the matriarch. He looked at the family crest. And he connected the dots. Elara Hayes, her mother's family, her quaint pearls, her, Elara, he whispered. His voice was a dry croak. Elara stepped forward. The cameras swarmed a frenzy of clicking shutters. "Hello, Marcus," she said, her voice clear and strong. "You wanted to introduce your new partner. I thought it was only fair that I introduce my old one." She gestured to her grandmother. The Page 6 reporter, the one who had written the finger-painting article, shouted first. "Miss Vance, who are these people?" Elara smiled. "These are my people, and you've been mispronouncing my name. It's not Vance. It's Devereux. Elara Devereux." A collective bomb went off in the room. Marcus literally staggered back, his hand grabbing the podium to steady himself. He was hyperventilating. He had just publicly, grotesque, and catastrophically humiliated the sole heiress of the Devereux dynasty. He wasn't just a king on a cardboard throne. He was a dead man. The world did not end for Marcus Vance in a fiery explosion. It ended in a series of quiet, precise, devastatingly legal clicks. As Elara's words, "It's Devereux," hung in the air, Liam the Enforcer finally stepped forward. He placed his leather portfolio on the podium that Marcus was still clinging to. "Mr. Vance," Liam said, his voice as unfeeling as a stock ticker, "let's talk about your reality, the Hudson Elysium Tower." Marcus just stared, his mouth opening and closing. "As of 9:00 a.m. this morning," Liam continued, addressing the room, "Devereux Holdings, the parent company of Lux Cap Partners, has called the note on the $2.8 billion bridge loan funding this project." A reporter from Bloomberg gasped. "Your Lux Cap?" "We are," Liam said. "Mr. Vance was delinquent on several covenants. No, Marcus choked. The payments, they're not due. The money is in escrow. Read the fine print, Julian added, pointing to a highlighted clause in a document he'd pulled from the portfolio. Clause 22A, the Material Adverse Change Clause. We find that the CEO and primary guarantor of the loan, Mr. Vance, has engaged in behavior that constitutes catastrophic reputational risk, specifically the public and fraudulent termination of his contract, he nodded at Elara, with a primary member of our holding. This is illegal, Marcus shouted, his voice cracking into a panicked shriek. On the contrary, Julian said, it's beautifully, perfectly legal. Mr. Adler, your own lawyer, approved the language. He's a very thorough man. A new horror dawned on Marcus. Adler works for you. But Adler, Genevieve said with a dismissive wave, is a sensible man. He knows which way the wind blows. He will be testifying in the fraud investigation. Fraud. The overvaluing of your assets to secure the LuxCap loan in the first place, Liam said, bored. Inflating your occupancy rates. Claiming commercial tenants that don't exist. We found the real books. Elara, it seems, knew where all the bodies were buried. Marcus turned to Elara, his eyes wild with betrayal. You spy in my own home. You called it clutter. Marcus. Elara said, her voice even. I called it a contingency plan. You taught me to always read the fine print. The journalists were in a shark-feeding frenzy. Mr. Vance, is it true you defrauded your lenders? Elara. How long were you planning this, Ms. Devereaux? What does this mean for the merger? Ah, yes. Julian said the Sino-Pacific deal, the $4 billion transfer. He pointed to the large screen behind the podium, where the deal complete graphic was supposed to appear. The deal, Julian announced, was contingent on the LuxCap funding being secure. As it is no longer secure, Sino-Pacific has, as of 2 minutes ago, withdrawn from all negotiations. On the screen, a new message flashed courtesy of Julian's technician. Deal terminated. Sino-Pacific Investments. No. No. Marcus was physically melting down. He tore at his tie, his face slick with a terrified sweat. But it's not just the tower. Liam continued, his voice a monotone of destruction. It's everything. He ticked the points off on his fingers. The bank holding the mortgage on this very building Devereaux owned. You are in default. We are evicting. The suppliers who all cancelled yesterday. They share a parent company, ours. Senator Keating, your man in Washington. He is currently in a meeting with the Senate Ethics Committee discussing the undisclosed gifts he received from you. He has, we are told, a sudden and profound desire to come clean. And finally, Genevieve said, stepping forward for the final blow. Vance Industries, a company built on air and arrogance. As your primary and, as of now, only creditor, we will be petitioning for involuntary bankruptcy. We will be seizing all assets to cover the outstanding debt. She paused, looking at the shell of the man before her. My family will take the penthouse, of course. We find the view appealing. Liam's team will be there at 3:00 p.m. to change the locks. Please have your personal effects removed by then. It was a perfect, devastating echo of the humiliation he had inflicted on Elara. Marcus Vance stared, his world dissolved. He had gone from a billionaire visionary to a bankrupt fraud in less than 10 minutes. He looked at the crowd, at the cameras, at the Devereaux family, standing united and powerful. And finally, his eyes landed on Elara. She was not smiling. She was not triumphant. She just looked finished. His knees, no longer able to support the weight of his ruined ambitions, buckled. Marcus Vance, the maverick of Manhattan, collapsed onto the stage, a pathetic, sobbing heap, as the cameras flashed, capturing the single greatest social and financial immolation in New York history. While Marcus was being publicly disassembled, Chloe Sterling was sitting in the first-class lounge at JFK, sipping a mimosa and frantically trying to move assets to an offshore account. She had seen the news alerts. Sterling Logistics raided by feds. Her father had called her screaming before being cut off. She was on her own. It's fine, she told herself, her leg bouncing under the table. Marcus is a fool, but he's a rich fool. The Sino-Pacific deal will close. He'll be furious with me, but he needs me. I'll fly to a non-extradition country, wait for this to blow over, and then I'll call him. He'll take me back. I'm the only one who understands him. Her flight to the Cayman Islands was boarding in 30 minutes. She was just a little radioactive. She just needed a break from the contamination zone. Miss Chloe Sterling. Two men in dark conservative suits and TSA badges stood over her table. Yes, she said, annoyed. We're with the U.S. Marshals Service. We need you to come with us. There are some irregularities with your passport. Irregularities? Chloe laughed, a high, nervous sound. It's brand new. I'm a first-class passenger. Now, ma'am, the first marshal said, his voice flat. He wasn't playing. A cold fear, the same one Marcus had felt, gripped her. I'm not going anywhere. I want my lawyer. You'll have plenty of time for that, the second marshal said. You're being detained. Detained for what? I haven't done anything. Insider trading, the first marshal said, picking up her carry-on bag. It seems you made a series of very well-timed stock trades against competitors of Sterling Logistics, trades that were apparently based on information you gleaned from, where was it, Frank? Classified shipping manifests, ma'am, Frank said, from a company called Devereaux Holdings. They filed the complaint this morning. They take corporate espionage very seriously. Chloe's face went white. Devereaux. The name was everywhere. That's not possible. That's my father's business. Not anymore, Frank said, pulling out a pair of handcuffs. Please stand up, Ms. Sterling, and please try not to make this a scene. This lounge is for real first-class passengers. The karma was brutal, swift, and entirely public. As Chloe Sterling was led out of the first-class lounge in handcuffs, her face a mask of shocked fury, she passed a television screen. The news was no longer about her father. It was a live feed from the Vance Industries press conference. The shot was a close-up of Marcus Vance, on his knees, sobbing. And standing over him, looking like a queen in a suit of blood-red armor, was Elara, the quiet, mousy, finger-painting wife. Chloe finally understood. She hadn't been replaced by Elara. She had been the tool Elara's family used to detonate Marcus's life. She was collateral damage. She wasn't the new power player. She was, as Marcus had so cruelly put it, just dead weight. The last sound she made before the lounge doors closed was a howl of pure, unadulterated rage. 6 months later, the name Marcus Vance was a punchline in New York. He had lost everything. The penthouse, the company, the friends. He was a pariah, buried in lawsuits from every contractor, investor, and employee he had ever stiffed. The fraud investigation had turned into an indictment. He was last seen balding and bloated, getting into a taxi outside his lawyer's office, shouting at a reporter that he was a visionary. The Hudson Elysium Tower, his glass and steel monument, sat half-finished, a rusted skeleton on the skyline. The Devereux family had bought it out of bankruptcy for 10 cents on the dollar, and Genevieve had publicly announced it was being reimagined. The Page Six reporter who had mocked Elara was now writing glowing, fawning pieces about the Devereux family's quiet, powerful philanthropy. But the real story wasn't in New York. It was in Florence, Italy. The Uffizi Gallery was hosting a gala. But this was not a gala of social climbers and insecure CEOs. This was a gathering of academics, artists, and patrons. They were celebrating the unveiling of a newly restored Botticelli, a masterpiece that had been languishing in a back room damaged by a flood decades ago. The project had been funded by a new powerful initiative, the Elara Devereux Foundation. Its mission was simple: to find the art, the beauty, and the history that the world had dismissed as clutter, and to restore it. Elara Devereux stood at the podium. She was not wearing red armor tonight. She wore an elegant, simple forest green dress. Her grandmother's pearls were fastened at her throat. She was radiant. "When we find something or someone that has been neglected," she said, her voice clear and warm, resonating in the ancient hall, "we have two choices. We can see them as dead weight, as a quaint relic of the past, to be discarded." She paused, and the room full of people who knew her story held its breath. "Or," she continued, "we can see the masterpiece beneath the dust. We can see the strength that survived. We can choose to restore, to rebuild, to reveal the truth. My foundation is built on the belief that nothing and no one is ever truly broken beyond repair." The applause was genuine, and for Elara, truly healing. After the speech, she walked through the gallery, accepting congratulations. Her brothers Liam and Julian were there, beaming with a pride that was real. Her grandmother Genevieve watched from a distance, a rare, soft smile on her face. A man approached Elara, a shy-looking man with kind eyes and paint smudges on his tuxedo jacket. He was Matteo, the Uffizi's chief restorer. "Signora Devereux," he said in accented English, "what you have done, it is a miracle." "No miracle, Matteo," Elara smiled. "Just patience, and the right tools, and a vision," he said, "to see what was always there." He kissed her hand. "Your speech was perfetto. Will you join me for a glass of champagne? I want to show you the sketches for the next project." "I would love that," Elara said. As she walked away with Matteo, laughing at something he said, she felt the last cold fragment of Elara Vance fall away. She was not a victim. She was not a wife. She was not even entirely just a Devereux. She was Elara, a restorer, a builder. She had taken the shattered pieces of her own life, and with the help of her dynasty, had built an empire of her own, one not of steel and glass, but of beauty, strength, and hard-earned truth. And that was the most powerful foundation of all. And that, as they say, is karma. Marcus thought he was the shark, but he was just a guppy in an ocean owned by a whale. Elara's story shows us that true power isn't about how loud you shout, but about the strength you hold in silence. It's a reminder to never, ever underestimate the quiet person in the room. What did you think of Marcus's epic downfall? Was Genevieve Devereux the most savage matriarch ever, or did Marcus get exactly what he deserved? Let me know your favorite part of this story in the comments below. If you loved this story of drama and ultimate revenge, please hit that like button. Share this video with someone who needs to see karma served. And of course, subscribe to the channel for more real-life stories like this one every single week. You won't want to miss what's coming next.
If you walked into a ballroom where the person who betrayed you called someone else royalty, would you fight to disappear? Or would you dare to show the world that the real queen doesn't need a crown? The Windsor Metropolitan Hotel never shined brighter than it did on the night Charlotte Lawrence's life collapsed. That evening, the ballroom became a playground for Manhattan's elite, a swirl of tailored tuxedos, designer gowns, and the sharp, unspoken competition of old money and new ambition. Outside, paparazzi lights danced against the marble columns, but inside, nobody cared about anything except being seen, envied, and remembered. Charlotte felt out of place from the moment she entered, clutching her small velvet purse, the soft silk of her midnight blue gown brushing against her swollen belly. She was 6 months pregnant and trying her best to look put together, but even as she smiled politely at acquaintances and shook hands with strangers, she felt their stares. Some pitying, some curious, some sharp as knives. She had come to support her husband, Gregory Lawrence, the evening's host and the man she had believed was the center of her universe. Charlotte tried to tell herself that tonight would be a turning point for their marriage. That he'd finally look at her the way he used to. Proud, devoted, in love. That they'd be a family again, not just two people sharing a penthouse and a last name. But as the room buzzed with excitement, Charlotte realized something was wrong. She spotted a few familiar faces, women she'd once called friends, women who now avoided her eyes, whispering behind flutes of champagne. The energy felt different. It was electric, tense, and it wasn't just the anticipation of the charity auction. There was a rumor in the air, a secret about to detonate. Then, suddenly, the lights dimmed and a hush fell. Every head turned toward the grand staircase as the MC, a man with a radio announcer's voice, commanded attention. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our gracious host, Gregory Lawrence." Gregory appeared, every inch the golden boy, his tuxedo crisp, his smile blinding. But he wasn't alone. On his arm, dressed in a gown of molten gold, was Marissa Dale, the influencer, the rumor, the problem Charlotte had tried to ignore for months. The woman who had, through veiled posts and private DMs, made it clear she was a threat. Gregory didn't hesitate, didn't falter. He led Marissa right into the spotlight, pausing on the stairs so the crowd could drink in the spectacle. Cameras flashed, a collective gasp rippled through the room. Charlotte stood frozen, her breath caught in her throat, her heartbeat thundering in her ears. For a moment, the world slowed. Gregory leaned into the mic and said words that would haunt Charlotte for years. "I'd like you all to meet someone truly special. Marissa Dale, royalty in every sense of the word. She's changed my life." The crowd erupted in applause, but it sounded like thunder to Charlotte, loud, merciless, and drowning out her own silent scream. She watched as Gregory kissed Marissa's hand, then whispered something in her ear that made her laugh, head thrown back like she owned the night. The humiliation burned hotter than anything Charlotte had ever felt. She saw guests watching her, some with smug delight, some with shallow sympathy. Her vision blurred, her feet heavy as concrete. She tried to move, but her body refused. She tried to blink back tears, but they welled up anyway, threatening to ruin her carefully composed face. Charlotte wanted to run, to disappear, to wake up and find this was just a nightmare. But reality pressed in. The cameras, the whispers, the knowledge that her husband had brought his mistress, no, his royalty, to the most important night of his career, that he had chosen this public, brutal way to erase her. As she stood there, desperate and alone, Marissa looked directly at her. Their eyes met. One woman victorious, the other vanquished. Marissa's smile widened, cruel and triumphant. She mouthed two words, "Thank you." That was the breaking point. Charlotte turned, pushing past a knot of socialites who gasped in staged concern. She stumbled out into the lobby, her hand shaking as she pressed the elevator button. Every muscle in her body screamed. The memory of every kind word Gregory had ever spoken shattered in her mind, replaced by the sharp image of him on those stairs, basking in Marissa's glow. In the privacy of the elevator, Charlotte let herself sob, shoulders shaking as silent tears stained her cheeks. She gripped the railing, her thoughts spiraling between rage and heartbreak. How could he do this? How could he humiliate her so publicly while she carried his child? What had she done to deserve this? But deep inside her, a new feeling began to take root, one colder, stronger, and infinitely more dangerous than grief. She wiped her tears, straightened her shoulders, and looked at her reflection in the mirrored walls. This was not the end of her story. This was the beginning. If Gregory wanted a show, she would give him one he would never forget. Tonight, Charlotte Lawrence was done being the silent, suffering wife. The next time she walked into a room, the world would see a different woman. A woman who didn't need anyone's approval, and certainly not a man who called his mistress royalty. As the elevator doors opened onto the city's neon-lit streets, Charlotte stepped out, her heart pounding with a mix of fear and resolve. She was about to show everyone, including Gregory and Marissa, that a queen never loses her crown. She simply chooses the right moment to claim her throne. Charlotte didn't remember much about how she got home that night. Her driver said she sat in silence the entire ride, her phone buzzing again and again with messages. Some from friends pretending to check on her, most from reporters sniffing for scandal. She let the phone die, stared out at the city lights, and tried to hold herself together for the sake of the tiny life growing inside her. Her apartment, once a symbol of everything she and Gregory had built together, now felt as cold as a hotel lobby. The walls echoed with memories. Late-night talks, takeout on the floor, dreams whispered in the darkness. Now, all she could feel was emptiness, the kind that seeps into your bones and makes you wonder if you'll ever feel safe again. She walked straight to the nursery, a half-finished room filled with expensive baby gifts and designer furniture, still in boxes. The crib stood in the corner, draped in a blanket her mother had knitted, a reminder of a family that still believed Gregory was a good man. Charlotte sat on the edge of the rocking chair, placed a hand on her stomach, and tried to steady her breathing. "Don't worry, baby," she whispered. "You have me. I promise you'll always have me." But the truth was, she felt like she had nothing left. Charlotte's mind raced with questions, each more painful than the last. Had she missed the signs? Had Gregory always been this heartless? Or had she just loved him too much to see the truth? How long had everyone else known? How long had Marissa been waiting for her moment to win? She remembered the beginning, how Gregory swept her off her feet at a networking gala, how he'd seemed different from every other man in the room. He'd told her she was special, that he needed someone real by his side, someone who understood ambition but didn't crave the spotlight. They'd moved in together after just 4 months, married after a year. It felt like destiny. For a while, Charlotte had been happy. She worked as a project coordinator for a nonprofit, a job that wasn't glamorous, but made her proud. Gregory encouraged her at first. He'd even attended a fundraiser or two, bragging about her work to his boardroom friends. But as his star rose and his circles grew glitzier, Charlotte began to notice the small cracks in their relationship. He'd come home later and later, brushing off her worries with a kiss on the cheek and a quick excuse about a last-minute deal or working dinner. The phone calls started. The text messages late at night. The way Gregory suddenly became obsessed with his image, his tailored suits, his workouts, his Instagram account that was now full of sleek photos of luxury events and inspiring quotes, none of which sounded like him. Charlotte felt herself being squeezed out of his world, little by little, until she was just a shadow in her own life. The night she told him she was pregnant, she'd expected everything to change. She thought he'd look at her and see his future, their family. Instead, he'd looked stunned, almost disappointed, and then he'd smiled, hugged her, and told her not to worry, that he'd take care of everything. But from that moment on, something shifted. He became even more distant. He started treating her like a delicate problem he didn't want to handle. Now, as Charlotte sat alone in the nursery, she replayed every argument, every cold shoulder, every time Gregory had said she was being dramatic or too sensitive. She realized she'd been fighting for a man who had already moved on, maybe not in public, but certainly in his heart. A wave of nausea hit her, sharper than anything she'd felt during her pregnancy. She stumbled to the bathroom, knelt by the toilet, and wept as quietly as she could. Not for Gregory. Not even for herself. But for the version of her life that had died in that ballroom. When the tears finally stopped, Charlotte stood up, rinsed her face, and stared at her reflection. She barely recognized the woman looking back at her. her eyes swollen, her hair a mess, her mouth set in a hard, straight line. She thought of all the times Gregory had called her his angel, his rock, the reason he worked so hard. Lies, she realized, just words. And then she thought about Marissa, the girl who had everything handed to her, beauty, fame, the attention of a man who craved adoration above all else. Charlotte wondered if Marissa had ever felt lonely, or if she even cared about the trail of broken hearts she left behind. A spark of anger flared inside her, hot and sudden. For the first time, Charlotte felt something stronger than pain. She felt a need to fight, not for Gregory, but for herself, and for the baby who would soon depend on her for everything. She sat back down and opened her laptop, her fingers trembling as she typed. She started with her resume, updating it for the first time in 2 years. She reached out to old friends, colleagues, people who still saw her as Charlotte, not Gregory's wife. She called her mother and told her the truth, tears and all, and heard the love and strength in her mother's voice. "You're stronger than you think, sweetheart. You always have been. Don't let him take that away." It was the first time Charlotte had believed it. As the sun crept over the city, washing her apartment in pale gold light, Charlotte felt a tiny kick from inside her belly, a reminder that life goes on, even when everything falls apart. She pressed her hand to her stomach and whispered, "We're going to be okay." And she believed it. Because that night, for the first time, Charlotte Lawrence stopped being the girl he thought he knew. She started becoming the woman she was meant to be. Charlotte learned the hard way that heartbreak doesn't keep business hours. The next morning, the city's tabloids blared headlines about Gregory's royal romance and Marissa's show-stopping debut, complete with photographs of Charlotte's stunned face in the background. The humiliation wasn't just private, it was public, and it stung more than she'd ever imagined. Her phone rang all day with calls from concerned friends and relatives who wanted to gossip under the pretense of comfort. Even her social media accounts became battlefields, as strangers left comments ranging from empty sympathy to barely veiled cruelty. "Chin up, Charlotte. You'll bounce back," someone wrote, while another sneered, "Well, at least the baby will have a rich dad." She deleted the apps, blocked numbers, and pulled the curtains tight. But the pain still found its way in. Charlotte's mother flew in that afternoon, refusing to take no for an answer. She arrived with a suitcase full of home-cooked meals, practical advice, and a kind of warmth that made the cold, empty apartment feel a little less lonely. Together, they set about organizing the nursery, unpacking boxes, and folding tiny clothes. With each onesie, each blanket, Charlotte found herself breathing a little easier. Still, the silence between the moments was thick with questions. "What now?" her mother finally asked, handing her a cup of tea. Charlotte stared out the window at the pulsing city below. "I don't know," she admitted. "I just don't want to be afraid anymore." Her mother squeezed her hand. "Being afraid is human, honey. But you're more than just a scared woman. You're a mother now, and that baby's going to need you to be fierce." It was the first time Charlotte felt the tiniest spark of hope. Maybe she couldn't erase what happened, but she could choose what to do next. Meanwhile, the world outside kept spinning. Gregory and Marissa were everywhere. Gossip columns, fashion blogs, even a late-night talk show that replayed the moment he called Marissa royalty as the crowd laughed. No one cared about the pregnant wife left behind, except as a footnote to someone else's scandal. One afternoon, Charlotte's old boss from the nonprofit called, her voice gentle. "We heard what happened. If you ever want to come back, even part-time, the door's open." It was the first olive branch she'd received, and she grabbed it. She began working remotely, planning community events and writing grant proposals from her living room, rediscovering the passion she'd set aside for Gregory's career. For the first time in months, she felt needed, valuable, alive. But the new reality also brought harsh reminders. Her attorney called to talk about her rights, her options, and the ugly logistics of separation. She'd have to face Gregory again, not as his wife, but as his adversary. It was a thought that made her sick, but also strangely determined. Then came the invitations, not to glamorous galas or charity auctions, but to mediation meetings and financial disclosures. Gregory predictably didn't show up in person. He sent his lawyer, a woman who smiled politely but never looked Charlotte in the eye. Still, Charlotte sat tall, her mother's words echoing in her mind. Fierce. You have to be fierce. Every day was a test of her strength. Some nights she still woke up sobbing, haunted by dreams of that ballroom, that staircase, that moment when her whole life fell apart. But in the daylight, she found herself piecing things back together, bit by bit. She began to see herself differently in the mirror. Not just a woman abandoned, but a woman surviving. Her belly grew rounder, her steps grew more purposeful. She set small goals: cook dinner, go for a walk, finish a work assignment. Each checkmark felt like a victory. She even allowed herself to hope that the worst was behind her, until one morning, as she left her apartment, she found a glossy invitation wedged under her door. It was for Gregory's birthday gala. Not just any party, but the event of the year. A lavish affair with all the city's power players. The front read, hosted by Gregory Lawrence and Marissa Dale. Dress code, royalty. The nerve. Charlotte's hands shook as she read it. It was a taunt, pure and simple. But instead of tears, she felt a strange, cold clarity settle over her. She wouldn't hide, she wouldn't cower, she would face them and the whole city on her own terms. But how? What could she do to reclaim her dignity, her power, her narrative? That night, Charlotte called her old friend Ava, a stylist who'd helped her with fundraisers back when Gregory still cared about her opinion. She told Ava everything, every detail, every wound, every humiliation. Ava listened, then said, "Honey, you want to make an entrance? I'll help you burn the place down, with style." The two women spent the next week plotting Charlotte's return to the social scene. They worked on her look, hair, makeup, wardrobe. But more than that, they worked on her confidence. Ava taught Charlotte how to walk, how to hold her head high, how to look right past the people who once tried to break her. They chose a dress unlike anything Charlotte had ever worn, a custom creation in shimmering ivory silk, tailored to her new curves, elegant and powerful. It was a dress for a woman who had survived, a woman reborn. As the gala approached, Charlotte rehearsed her entrance again and again, standing in her bedroom, imagining the moment she would walk into that room, every eye on her, not in pity, but in awe. But more than anything, Charlotte knew this was about more than just one night. It was about proving to herself that she was still standing, still fighting, still worthy. The day of the gala, Charlotte stood before her mirror, her heart pounding. She thought of the woman she'd been, the girl left behind, the wife erased, the mother forgotten, and she thought of the woman she was becoming, strong, fierce, and ready to reclaim her story. She pressed a hand to her stomach and smiled at her reflection, whispering, "Tonight we walk in together, and no one will ever make us feel small again." With that, Charlotte Lawrence, pregnant, betrayed but unbroken, prepared to step back into the spotlight. This time the story would be hers. The night of Gregory's birthday gala arrived with a thrum of anticipation that stretched across the entire city. Everyone who mattered, politicians, business tycoons, celebrities, old-money socialites, was going to be there. For weeks, gossip sites had speculated. Would the jilted ex-wife dare show her face? Would Marissa, Gregory's royalty, finally be accepted as queen of the night? No one expected a showdown. No one thought Charlotte would have the guts to show up, let alone outshine them all. But they had never really known Charlotte at all. The grand ballroom at the Astoria Plaza glittered like the crown jewels themselves. Ice sculptures shimmered, golden champagne flowed endlessly, and waiters moved like ghosts through a sea of gowns and tuxedos. Cameras flashed as the guests arrived, each one hungry for a glimpse of the drama everyone secretly hoped for. In the center of it all, Gregory stood tall in a bespoke midnight blue suit, Marissa clinging to his arm, their smiles wide and performative. They looked every bit the power couple, rich, beautiful, untouchable. Inside, Marissa was loving every second of it. She greeted guests with a confident air, showing off her designer dress and dazzling jewelry. She moved through the crowd like she owned it, barely able to hide her glee as she overheard people whispering about her triumph. This was her moment. She had waited for it her entire life. What Marissa didn't realize was that she wasn't the only woman who'd been preparing for this night. Outside, Charlotte sat in the back of a town car, hands folded tightly in her lap. Her heart pounded, but her expression was calm. She wore the custom ivory silk gown Ava had designed, her hair pulled into a soft, elegant chignon. Her makeup was flawless, timeless, powerful, and a little bit defiant. Her only jewelry was a pair of pearl earrings, a gift from her late grandmother. She wanted to look like herself, only stronger. The driver opened the door, and Charlotte stepped onto the red carpet. The air crackled. For a split second, everything went silent. Then the cameras exploded, flashing, shouting, calling her name as if she were the guest of honor. She didn't flinch. She walked slowly, her posture tall, her gaze focused straight ahead. It didn't matter that her heart was pounding like a drum. She wouldn't let them see fear. The doorman greeted her with the same respect they'd shown every other guest. Inside, the hush returned as people turned and stared. Some mouths fell open. Others whispered, "Is that? Oh my God, she looks incredible. She's actually here." But Charlotte didn't stop to acknowledge them. She was here on her own terms. From across the ballroom, Gregory saw her first. For a moment, he looked shocked, then almost annoyed. Marissa followed his gaze and saw Charlotte gliding through the crowd, her baby bump framed elegantly by the ivory silk. Marissa's face faltered. She gripped Gregory's arm tighter, whispering something urgent. Gregory muttered back, his jaw tightening. As Charlotte made her way toward the center of the room, she could feel eyes on her from every angle. The music softened. Even the waiters paused. She reached the bottom of the grand staircase and paused, taking a steadying breath. Marissa moved first, breaking away from Gregory to intercept her. Her heels clicked like gunshots on the marble floor. "Charlotte, I didn't think you'd actually show," she said, her smile sharp and false. "You look better than I expected." Charlotte smiled softly. "Thank you, Marissa. It's good to see you too." Gregory approached, slipping an arm around Marissa's waist for the benefit of the onlookers. "Charlotte, I hope you're not here to cause a scene. This is a special night for Marissa and me." Charlotte shook her head, her voice calm. "Gregory, I have no interest in your scene. I just came to wish you a happy birthday, and to remind you that dignity can't be bought, no matter how many cameras are watching." The tension was thick, and people strained to hear every word. Charlotte kept her composure, refusing to be drawn into a catfight. Instead, she turned and walked away, moving through the crowd with her head held high. For the rest of the night, she was a sensation. People approached her with cautious admiration. A few whispered their support, others just stared in awe. She found Ava, who squeezed her hand and whispered, "You did it. You look like the queen he wishes he'd kept." Marissa, meanwhile, was furious. She spent the night fuming in the shadow of Charlotte's entrance, her jealousy growing with every compliment Charlotte received. She tried to cling to Gregory, but he was distracted, glancing Charlotte's way, remembering a time when he'd been proud to be her husband. The power Marissa thought she'd won suddenly felt as fragile as glass. Charlotte barely noticed. For the first time in months, she felt like herself again. Seen, respected, untouchable. She made polite conversation, accepted congratulations, and even danced once with an old friend from her nonprofit days. It was a small rebellion, a statement to herself and the world that she was back. But beneath the glamour, the night was a battleground. Marissa's bitterness grew, and Gregory's insecurities started to show. The masks they wore for the public began to slip. At one point, Charlotte overheard Marissa snapping at Gregory. "You said she'd never show her face again. Do something. She's stealing all my attention." Gregory's face reddened, but he just muttered, "Relax, Marissa. It's one night." But Charlotte saw the fear behind Marissa's eyes. The world had expected a broken woman, wrath, but Charlotte had delivered strength and grace instead. No one was talking about royalty anymore. They were talking about her. As midnight approached, Charlotte slipped away quietly, the room buzzing in her wake. Outside, she looked up at the city skyline and let herself breathe for the first time all night. She had walked into the lion's den and come out untouched. She knew the war wasn't over. Marissa and Gregory would keep scheming, keep trying to write her out of their story. But tonight, she'd reminded everyone, including herself, who she really was, and she was just getting started. The days after the gala should have felt triumphant for Charlotte, but victory always tastes different when you're fighting to survive. The press went wild. Social media exploded with side-by-side photos of Charlotte's dazzling entrance and Marissa's barely contained rage. Headlines ranged from "Scorned Ex-Wife Outshines Royalty at Gala" to "Lawrence Love Triangle, Who Really Runs New York?" Everyone had an opinion, and Charlotte's inbox flooded with messages, some supportive, some cruel, and most from people she barely knew. At first, Charlotte wanted to hide from it all. She dreaded opening her email, turning on the TV, even walking outside for fear of running into someone who'd seen the viral videos. She tried to focus on her nonprofit work, on her health, and on preparing for the baby. But it was impossible to ignore the whispers and stares. Even trips to the grocery store felt like walking through a minefield. She heard her name everywhere. The worst part was the betrayal that came next. Not from Gregory, not even from Marissa, but from the people Charlotte had thought were her friends. One by one, invitations dried up. Couples she'd dined with for years stopped replying to her texts. The group chat she'd helped start suddenly went silent. The message was clear. In their world, you are only valuable as long as you belong to the man at the top. But Charlotte refused to be erased. Instead of shrinking away, she leaned in. She used her growing platform to talk about resilience, single motherhood, and the strength it takes to start over. She gave interviews, not to tabloid reporters hungry for tears, but to women's magazines and podcasts that wanted the truth, not just the drama. She told her story honestly, and people listened. Meanwhile, Gregory and Marissa's fairy tale started to unravel under the public glare. Their relationship, built on spectacle and spite, began to crack. Gregory, so used to admiration, was rattled by the way the media now portrayed him. A callous, self-absorbed husband who discarded his pregnant wife for a social climber. Marissa's influencer deals dried up as brands worried about backlash. Rumors surfaced that Marissa had demanded Gregory propose, but he kept delaying, blaming bad timing and negative press. The real storm hit one Friday morning. Charlotte was at home, reviewing a proposal for a literacy campaign, when her phone lit up with dozens of alerts. Video clips from the gala had surfaced, unedited, unfiltered, and showing more than anyone had realized. Someone had recorded Marissa sneering at Charlotte as she walked in, whispering, "She's nothing." Gregory only kept her around for the sympathy vote. The audio was crystal clear. Public opinion flipped in an instant. Where people had once called Charlotte a victim, they now called her a survivor. Comment sections filled with outrage toward Marissa and sympathy for Charlotte. "No woman deserves that," wrote one. "She walked in like a queen while they acted like children," wrote another. Within hours, talk shows and news programs were dissecting every frame of the footage. Gregory tried to do damage control, releasing a bland statement about privacy and moving on. Marissa posted a carefully curated Instagram apology, but the backlash was immediate. Brands began to drop her. Her follower count plummeted. The tide had turned, and for the first time, Charlotte wasn't the one left drowning. But with every wave of support, new challenges rose. Gregory's lawyer reached out, pushing for a quiet divorce and warning Charlotte that if she didn't cooperate, the family money would disappear. "Don't fight me on this, Charlotte," Gregory's email read. "Let's settle this privately, for the baby's sake." It was a threat dressed as concern, and it only made Charlotte more determined. She hired her own legal team, recommended by Ava, fiercely competent and unafraid to play hardball. Together, they began the work of untangling years of shared assets, investments, and secrets. Every meeting was a reminder of what she'd survived. Every signed paper, every demand for transparency, made her stronger. In the background, the city buzzed with rumors. Stories surfaced about Gregory's questionable business practices, Marissa's affairs, and the lies that had propped up their glittering world. The higher they had climbed, the farther they had to fall. One night, as Charlotte tried to sleep, she received a message from a woman she didn't know. The woman claimed to have dated Gregory before Charlotte, and warned, "He'll try to make you look crazy. He always does." Instead of fear, Charlotte felt only resolve. She'd spent enough years doubting herself. She wouldn't let anyone rewrite her story again. As the weeks dragged on, the court dates approached. Charlotte's belly grew, the baby kicking with new strength every day, a reminder that life was moving forward whether Gregory liked it or not. Her mother stayed by her side, helping with meals, errands, and the emotional whiplash of rebuilding a life from scratch. Ava became her champion in public and private, always reminding her, "You already won. the moment you chose yourself. Charlotte's days became a mix of survival and strategy. She prepared for every hearing like a battle, never sure what lies Gregory's team would invent. But each time she walked into the courtroom, she did so with her head high, her resolve hardened by months of humiliation and self-doubt. She learned to trust herself again. She learned to trust the friends who had stayed, the family that never wavered, and the new community of women who cheered her on from the sidelines. She learned that sometimes the greatest betrayal is not what someone does to you, but what you let them convince you about yourself. By the time the first official court hearing arrived, Charlotte no longer felt like the woman who had been humiliated in front of the world. She felt like someone reborn, tough, scarred, but powerful in a way she'd never expected. And as she stepped into that courtroom, camera flashes bouncing off the marble floors, she whispered to herself, they wanted a show. Let's give them one they'll never forget. Charlotte never imagined how much strength it would take just to keep breathing. Courtroom days blurred together, each one a test of her patience, her dignity, and her will to fight for herself and her unborn child. The city watched every move. News vans lined the courthouse steps, commentators speculated on TV, and every morning Charlotte woke to new headlines dissecting her every gesture. She had become a symbol for women everywhere, but when the world wasn't looking, she was just tired, pregnant, and alone. Gregory made everything harder than it needed to be. Instead of taking responsibility, he fought her on every detail. He denied promises he'd made, questioned her character in court documents, and even hinted that maybe the baby wasn't his. The accusation cut deeper than any betrayal so far. Charlotte's lawyer objected instantly, but the words lingered in the air, cold and poisonous. Charlotte stared straight ahead, refusing to let anyone see her break. Marissa, too, made her presence known. She came to the hearings wearing designer sunglasses, arm in arm with Gregory, acting as if the entire ordeal was just another event to be survived for the cameras. She'd smirk at Charlotte, whisper to Gregory, then flash a dazzling smile at the reporters outside. But there was a tension in her movements, a nervous energy that suggested all was not well behind the scenes. The pressure built with every hearing. Charlotte found herself on the verge of tears more often than she wanted to admit. Some days she had to lock herself in the bathroom, breathing in and out, counting to 10 as her baby kicked inside her, reminding her that she couldn't give up. Her mother and Ava were always there, a quiet army of love and loyalty, but in the darkest moments, it felt like she was fighting the world alone. Things reached a breaking point one afternoon during a particularly brutal mediation session. Gregory's lawyer pushed a stack of papers across the table, smirking. "Your client wants to keep the apartment, the car, and full custody?" he sneered. "On what grounds? Being a social media martyr doesn't entitle her to Gregory's fortune." Charlotte's attorney remained calm. "We're not here to debate hashtags, we're here to protect a mother and her child." Gregory's voice cut through the room. "You never cared about my career, Charlotte. All you cared about was looking good in public. You were never enough for me. Marissa gets it. She's ambitious. She makes things happen." Charlotte flinched, the words sharp as knives, but she didn't cry. She just looked at Gregory, really looked at him. For the first time, she saw a man who was scared, cornered, and desperate to blame someone else for his own emptiness. The mediation ended in stalemate. Outside, Charlotte's hands shook so badly she could barely hold her purse. The building felt enormous, cold and unfriendly, its marble halls echoing with the footsteps of men like Gregory. She wanted to collapse, to let the exhaustion swallow her whole. But she couldn't, because now, more than ever, the world was watching. That night, alone in her apartment, Charlotte reached her lowest point. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if any of it was worth it. She remembered every promise she'd made to herself, every dream she'd had about family and love and the future. All of it seemed so far away now, replaced by paperwork, arguments, and the growing sense that she was losing herself in the fight. She pressed her hand to her belly and whispered, "I'm so sorry. I'm trying. I promise I'm trying." In the darkness, her phone buzzed. A message from Ava. It was simple. "You're not alone. Not ever. Don't let him win." Charlotte read the words over and over. For the first time in weeks, she let herself sob, letting the pain wash over her and out. She cried for the life she'd lost, the love she'd given, and the woman she used to be. But as the tears slowed, something shifted deep inside her. She realized that what Gregory and Marissa feared most wasn't a headline or a scandal. It was her, standing tall, refusing to disappear, showing them and the world that some women don't break. They bend, and then they rise. She made a decision. No more hiding, no more shrinking, no more letting others decide her worth. If Gregory wanted a war, she'd give him one, and she'd fight it on her terms. The next morning, Charlotte called her lawyer. "I want to pursue everything I'm owed," she said, her voice steady. "Every asset, every right. Not just for me, but for my child." She began documenting everything. Every message, every broken promise, every lie. She hired a financial investigator to look into Gregory's business dealings, and when the investigator found discrepancies, Charlotte made sure the right people heard about it. She spoke with women's advocacy groups, sharing her story to empower others and build a support system that went far beyond her own situation. The more she fought, the stronger she became. She started sleeping better. She started eating well, taking care of herself not just as a mother, but as a woman with a future. She went for walks, met with old friends, and even laughed again, real, full laughs that reminded her she was still alive. Gregory noticed. His calls became more desperate, his lawyer more aggressive. Marissa started posting cryptic messages on social media, hinting at betrayals and secrets. The pressure was on, and this time, it wasn't Charlotte who was crumbling. One afternoon, after a particularly successful legal meeting, Charlotte returned home and found a letter slipped under her door. No return address, no name, just a single sheet of paper with 4 words, "You are winning. Don't stop." She held the note to her chest and smiled. For the first time since her world had fallen apart, she believed it. The breaking point hadn't destroyed her. It had set her free. The city buzzed with rumors, but no one outside Charlotte's circle knew what was really coming next. The public saw a pregnant woman fighting her husband in court, but behind the scenes, Charlotte was gathering more than just evidence. She was discovering the truth about who she really was and what she was capable of. It began with the financial investigator Charlotte had hired, an old friend of her father's, discreet but relentless. He dug deep into Gregory's business holdings, his investments, and the trust funds he'd tried to hide offshore. One morning, just as dawn turned the city pink, Charlotte's phone rang. It was the investigator, his voice low and urgent. "You might want to sit down," he told her. "Gregory's company isn't just hiding assets. He's been funneling money through shell corporations, and your name is still on some of the founding documents. That makes you a major shareholder, more than he is, in fact." Charlotte was stunned. "Are you saying?" "I'm saying if you want to, you can take control, legally. He can fight you, but with your signatures, your records, and this evidence, the courts will almost certainly side with you." For the first time, Charlotte felt something other than fear or anger. She felt power. But that wasn't the only secret Charlotte unearthed. Through her nonprofit work and growing network, she found out Marissa was far from the innocent, new love Gregory had painted her to be. A whisper from a former assistant, a DM from a brand rep. Little by little, a pattern emerged. Marissa had been targeting wealthy men for years, climbing from one high-profile relationship to another, leaving chaos in her wake. Her relationship with Gregory had started before Charlotte and Gregory had even officially separated. The press didn't know any of this yet. But Charlotte was no longer interested in playing defense. It was time to step into the light. She met with her legal team and the investigator, reviewing every detail. They mapped out a strategy, not just to protect herself and her child, but to ensure Gregory and Marissa faced consequences for what they'd done. Charlotte wanted dignity and justice, not just for her, but for anyone who'd ever been told to stay quiet and take the blame. But there was one more surprise no one, not even Charlotte, had anticipated. One evening, as she packed away baby clothes and sorted paperwork, the doorbell rang. She opened the door to find an elegantly dressed older woman, sharp-eyed, with an air of authority. It was Gregory's mother, Eleanor, whom Charlotte hadn't seen since before the separation. "May I come in?" Eleanor asked. Her voice was gentle but determined. Charlotte hesitated, then nodded. She made tea, and they sat in the living room, awkward at first, but then Eleanor reached out, her hands trembling slightly. "I came to say I'm sorry," she said. "I raised Gregory to believe love was something you earned, not something you gave. That was my mistake. But I see you, Charlotte. I see what you've been through and what you're still standing for. I want to help." Charlotte was too shocked to speak for a moment. Eleanor continued, "Gregory thinks he's untouchable, but his board is tired of the bad press, the reckless spending, the scandals. I have influence more than he realizes. If you want to make a real move, take control of your share, make a public statement, whatever you need, I'll back you." For the first time in months, Charlotte felt a sense of family she hadn't realized she'd missed. She accepted Eleanor's support, and together they made a plan. Charlotte would attend the next board meeting, not as a humiliated wife, but as a major shareholder, armed with evidence and confidence. The night before the meeting, Charlotte barely slept. She stood in the nursery, stroking her belly, whispering, "Tomorrow, everything changes, not just for me, but for you, for us." She could hardly believe how far she'd come, from crying in the dark to standing at the edge of real power. When the morning came, Charlotte dressed carefully in a navy suit, professional, commanding, and perfect for a woman about to take back her life. Ava and her mother were there, giving her last-minute hugs and pep talks. "You're not going there to beg," Ava reminded her. "You're going there to lead. You earned this." Charlotte arrived at the boardroom early, her heart pounding, but her head clear. When Gregory entered, flanked by Marissa and their legal team, he tried to sneer, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of panic. The room was full of men who had never bothered to look her in the eye. Today, she made sure they saw her. The meeting began with routine business, but soon Charlotte stood, presenting the evidence of Gregory's financial mismanagement, the shell companies, the risk to investors, and her own controlling stake. Eleanor spoke next, confirming everything Charlotte said, her voice strong and unwavering. The board members looked from Gregory to Charlotte, realizing the balance of power had shifted. By the end of the meeting, the outcome was clear. Charlotte was voted interim chairwoman. Gregory was suspended pending an internal review. Marissa's face turned sheet white. Gregory erupted in protest, but the board ignored him. As Charlotte left the building, reporters surged forward, but this time she wasn't running. She paused, spoke clearly, and said, "I will always stand up for myself and for what's right, for my family, for my child, and for anyone who's ever been told to keep quiet. That time is over." The city had a new story now, and Charlotte Lawrence was its unexpected star. The news of Charlotte's dramatic rise spread through the city like wildfire. In the days after she took over as interim chairwoman, the company's stock stabilized. Business journalists who had once dismissed her as nothing more than a socialite or the pregnant wife now called her bold, decisive, and unshakable. She did interviews not about her heartbreak, but about responsible leadership, rebuilding trust, and putting families before egos. Her every move was watched, analyzed, and sometimes, for the first time, admired. Inside the company, some resisted the changes. A handful of Gregory's allies grumbled behind closed doors, hoping she would stumble or crack under pressure. But Charlotte had prepared for this. Every morning, she met with the company's executive team, listening more than she spoke, asking tough questions, and learning from those who wanted her to succeed. She brought in outside consultants to clean up the mess Gregory had made and set up new programs for working parents, an unspoken message to every woman who'd ever felt sidelined. Marissa was nowhere to be found. In the fallout of the boardroom coup, her influencer deals dried up completely. Paparazzi snapped photos of her leaving Gregory's penthouse with packed bags, her face hidden by oversized sunglasses. Charlotte refused to let her bitterness distract her from the work ahead. She had what she needed: control, dignity, and a future for herself and her baby. But reclaiming her power wasn't just about business. With her new role came new confidence. Charlotte invested in herself for the first time in years. She updated her wardrobe, not for Gregory, not for the cameras, but for herself. She got a new haircut, bold and fresh, the kind that turned heads in the elevator. She resumed yoga classes and started taking long, slow walks through the city parks, letting her mind clear and her spirit heal. People noticed the change. Her nonprofit colleagues cheered her on, texting encouragement and sending flowers to her office. Her mother and Ava beamed with pride at every headline, every step forward. Even strangers, women she'd never met, wrote letters and emails thanking her for showing what was possible after betrayal. Yet not everyone was thrilled with her comeback. Gregory, now banned from the company offices, launched a PR campaign to win sympathy. He appeared on morning shows, telling glossy versions of the story where he was misunderstood and heartbroken. He tried to portray Charlotte as ruthless, a woman who'd stolen his life's work. But the public was tired of his act. When a reporter finally asked Gregory if he regretted calling Marissa royalty, he hesitated, then stammered, I think I made some mistakes." Charlotte, for her part, kept her public comments measured and kind. "Everyone makes mistakes," she told a news anchor, "but not everyone is willing to grow from them. I believe in forgiveness, but I also believe in accountability. We can all do better, for ourselves and for the next generation." Privately, the changes were even more profound. The baby's nursery, once a room of sorrow and unfinished dreams, was now bright and welcoming, filled with hand-painted murals, soft music, and a sense of hope. Charlotte played classical music every evening, sitting in her rocking chair, reading aloud from her favorite childhood books. She talked to her baby about strength, kindness, and the importance of never letting anyone else define your worth. One evening, as the sun set over the city, Ava stopped by with takeout and a bottle of sparkling cider. They laughed, reminisced, and made plans for the future. "You know," Ava said, "you're the only woman I know who could walk into a room full of enemies and leave with the crown." Charlotte smiled, feeling, for the first time in a long while, beautiful, powerful, and free. But the world had one more test in store. A week before the baby's due date, Charlotte received an official letter from the board. The internal investigation was complete. Gregory's financial misconduct had been proven beyond a doubt. The board offered her the permanent CEO position, not just as a figurehead, but with full executive powers and support. Her hands shook as she read it, pride, fear, and disbelief mixing in her chest. That night, she called her mother, barely able to contain her excitement. "You did it, sweetheart," her mother said through happy tears. "Not just for you, but for every woman who's ever been told she wasn't enough. Your baby is going to be so proud." The next morning, Charlotte made her first official act as CEO. She announced expanded family leave for all employees and funded a new foundation in her child's name, dedicated to supporting single parents. The news spread fast. Employees, some in tears, stopped her in the hallways to thank her. It was the legacy she wanted, not revenge, but real change. On the day she was set to be officially introduced as CEO at the annual shareholders gala, Charlotte stood in front of her closet, hands trembling. Her gown, deep emerald, with subtle gold beading, hugged her bump and made her feel both strong and regal. She remembered the first gala, months before, when Gregory had introduced Marissa as royalty. This time there would be no cruel jokes, no cameras hunting for her pain, only respect, admiration, and the knowledge that she had claimed her throne. As she made her entrance, the room went silent, then erupted in applause. She accepted flowers, shook hands, and gave a speech that moved many to tears. She thanked the people who believed in her, forgave those who doubted, and made a vow to lead with courage and compassion. For the first time in her life, Charlotte Lawrence walked into a room and knew, absolutely, that she belonged. She was no one's victim. She was the queen. The ballroom sparkled with crystal lights and hope as Charlotte stood center stage, the final applause still echoing in her ears. People rose from their seats, not just to honor her title or her victory, but to celebrate a story that had become so much bigger than one woman's heartbreak. The cameras caught her smile, but only a handful of people in the room could truly understand what that smile meant. It wasn't about revenge or even redemption. It was about freedom. That night, Charlotte lingered after the gala, accepting congratulations and sharing genuine laughter with employees and friends. For years, she'd let Gregory and society define her worth. Now, she set her own value, and it had nothing to do with who loved or left her. She had become the very role model she'd once searched for, proof that even the deepest wounds could heal into something unbreakable. In a quiet corner, she felt a gentle kick from her baby, a reminder of what really mattered. As guests filtered out, Ava found her, eyes shining with pride. "You've changed this city, she said. "And not just for yourself." Charlotte squeezed her hand. "We all change the world a little when we decide to stand up, Ava. I just wish it didn't have to hurt so much first." They laughed together, the kind of laughter that only survivors share. The ballroom slowly emptied, but Charlotte lingered, walking through the empty aisles. She thought of the woman she'd been, uncertain, afraid, waiting for someone to tell her she was enough. That woman was gone. In her place stood a leader, a mother, and a survivor who'd faced humiliation and loss and still walked with her head high. Outside, the city glowed. Charlotte took a long walk home, her heels clicking on the pavement, the late spring air cool and alive with promise. Every streetlight felt like a small star guiding her forward. She stopped to breathe it all in. The fresh start, the freedom, the pride that pulsed in her veins. Her phone buzzed with messages from employees, reporters, even strangers who had watched her journey unfold. There were stories of other women inspired to leave bad marriages, start new careers, or simply believe in themselves again. But not all messages were congratulations. As she reached her building, she saw one last text from Gregory. "You won. I hope you're happy. I lost everything." She stared at the words for a long moment. Once they would have broken her. Now she only felt a strange, gentle pity. She typed back, "You lost what you chose to lose. I only ever wanted respect. I hope someday you find it, for yourself and for everyone you hurt." She meant every word. The next morning, Charlotte woke with a calm she'd never known. The city felt different. The air itself seemed lighter. She spent the day in quiet reflection, journaling her gratitude, planning for the baby's arrival, and savoring her first real breath of peace in years. Her mother called to check in, promising to come stay for a while once the baby was born. Ava sent flowers and a silly card for Her Majesty, the CEO, Queen, and most unmessable woman in New York. But the most surprising visitor came that afternoon. Eleanor, Gregory's mother, stopped by with a small box. "This was my grandmother's," she said, pressing it into Charlotte's hands. "She used to say a woman's true legacy is not what she builds, but who she becomes. I know you'll teach your child the same." Inside the box was a delicate gold bracelet engraved with the words, "Strength is the only crown that matters." Charlotte wept, holding the bracelet tight, promising herself she would pass it down to her child one day, not as a trophy, but as a reminder of all they had survived together. As her due date approached, Charlotte wrapped up her work, prepared the nursery, and wrote letters to her future self and to her baby. Words of love, hope, and fierce encouragement. "You are not the mistakes of others," she wrote. "You are not the wounds you inherit. You are the story you write with your own two hands." When labor finally began, it was stormy outside, a wild, dramatic night that seemed to mirror the journey she'd traveled. Her mother held her hand through the pain, Ava waiting anxiously in the lobby. After hours of sweat and tears, Charlotte delivered a healthy baby girl, her cries strong and insistent. The nurses wrapped her in a blanket, placing her in Charlotte's arms. In that moment, all the heartbreak and struggle melted away, replaced by a love so deep it nearly scared her. She looked into her daughter's eyes and whispered, "You will never have to earn your worth. You are born with it. You are loved, always." News of the birth spread quickly, and for a brief moment, the city paused to celebrate not just a new CEO, but a new life and a new beginning. Gregory sent flowers and a note of congratulations, brief but sincere. Charlotte welcomed it as a symbol that even broken things can be mended, in small ways. As weeks passed, Charlotte settled into motherhood, juggling late-night feedings with executive calls and foundation work. She was exhausted but happy. The board meetings and legal battles faded into memory, replaced by baby giggles, first smiles, and a home filled with warmth. And so the story that began with betrayal ended not with revenge, but with grace, purpose, and a promise to raise her daughter to be bold, brave, and unafraid to stand up for herself, no matter what the world might say. Because the real royalty in this story wasn't in titles or money, but in every woman who survives heartbreak, reclaims her life, and leads with love. Charlotte Lawrence never needed anyone to crown her. She wore her legacy with pride, for everyone to see. So the story has ended, and our wonderful friends, are you still here with me until now? If you are, then maybe this story has touched your heart in some special way. You see, life isn't about avoiding pain or betrayal. It's about what you do when your world falls apart. Like Charlotte, sometimes the best version of ourselves is born from heartbreak. We learn that real power comes from within, not from someone else's approval or a fancy title. As heterodox wisdom says, you are not the wounds you inherit. You are the story you write with your own two hands. Healing isn't about revenge or proving your worth to others. It's about reclaiming your own story and choosing love, strength, and dignity. If this story meant something to you, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to leave a comment below. Tell us what part moved you the most, or share your own story. This is a community where your voice matters. We're always here for you.